Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm David from Germany, and today I'd like to present the books that I've read in January. About 5 minutes per book, always following the same pattern more or less. A brief plot summary and then what's thematically or stylistically distinctive about the book and why you should read it and who it's best suited for. A word of warning right up front. So those of you who know me from my previous channel, Polyglot Reading, will be aware that I rarely end up with the current bestsellers or new releases. I tend to gravitate towards older, sometimes forgotten, sometimes suppressed texts that have caught my attention for all sorts of reasons. So don't expect bookshop trends. Think of it more as literary message in a bottle from the depth of my bookshelves. In January 26, I had a lot of spare time to read, and so I read a total number of 9 books. I think 5 of which are suitable for this channel in English language because these were books either written in English language or at least available in English translation. And they are wonderfully diverse. So we have a Polish science fiction author writing fairy tales about robots. And there's an Austrian Jewish physician novelist with channeling Dostoevsky through the lens of tropical medicine, as a Hungarian-Austrian satirist anatomizing the petty bourgeois soul of interwar Europe, and there's a late Wilkie Collins mystery that sends a young woman to investigate her father's murder, and 2 novels by the great Anthony Trollope that bookend his monumental Palliser series. So let's get started. Number 1. So I am showing usually the German translations, but I will also show you the cover of the English edition if they are available. Stanisław Lem, robot fairy tales are published in English under the title Mortal Engines. So what is this about? This book is a collection of short stories written in the style of classical fairy tales and legends, except that the protagonists are not princes and princesses, not witches and wizards, but robots, automata, cyberneticists, and artificial intelligences. So in many of these short stories, 2 so-called constructors, Troll and Clapotius, they travel through a universe populated almost exclusively by machines, by robots. And in the process, they experience some adventures that they read like science fiction variations on Grimm's fairy tales or on the tales of Thousand and One Nights. So kings are toppled, dragons are fought, impossible riddles are solved, and only that everything is made of metal, of circuits and algorithms. And so what makes this book special? I think the fascinating thing for me about this book is how Stanisław Lem brings together 2 completely different literary traditions, and he strikes a wholly original spark from the friction between these traditions and narrative styles. On the one hand, this fairy tale form with its archaic formulas, its repetitive structures, its naive quest logic of task, trial, and triumph. And on the other hand, there's this world of cybernetics, information theory, robots, mathematical logic. And the effect of combining these is a twofold effect. On the one hand, Lem demystifies the fairy tale element through this technical rational framing. And on the other hand, and I think to me personally this is the greater effect, he also exposes our faith in technology as a new form of superstitious belief in fairy tales. So anyone who believes technology will solve all our problems is ultimately just telling themselves fairy tales. And for 1964, I think this is a remarkably prophetic insight. Stylistically, the book is also a fireworks display of wordplay. So Lem invents an entire techno-poetic artificial language is brimming with neologisms and grotesque new word formations and absurd pseudoscientific explanations. So that's linguistic pyrotechnics. Who should read this book? Yeah, because I think it's, or why should you read it? I think you should read it because it's an equally intelligent and entertaining book. And I think in an age of artificial intelligence and algorithms ruling the world, though this book is often almost uncanny topicality. Lem asks questions in the early 1960s, questions that we still haven't answered satisfactorily yet. And so, besides, when was the last time you read a book of fairy tales that make you laugh and philosophize at the same time? Who is it for? I think it's for anyone who likes Borges, for anyone who likes Calvino's fantastic tales, for anyone who likes Lewis Carroll's logical twists, for science fiction readers who want more than just spaceships and laser cannons, and for everyone who believes that literature can be both clever and entertaining at the same time. It's also a wonderful book for readers who normally have nothing to do with science fiction, because it isn't really a science fiction book at all. It's rather a philosophical grotesque in the garb of the fairy tale tradition. Book number 2, Ernst Weiss, Georg Letham, Physician and Murderer. I think it was published first in 1931. What is it about? The novel opens with a great first sentence. How could I, Georg Letham, a physician, a man of scientific training, of certain philosophical aspirations, how could I let myself be so far carried away as to commit this crime of the gravest sort, the murder of my wife? So this is a novel and a sort of a confession. From this confession, the novel unfolds in two vast movements. In the first movement, we learn all about Letham's, in German we pronounce it Letham, not Letham. The TH is not a TH sound in German. By the way, it's an anagram of Hamlet, if you just in case you haven't noticed. So we learn about Letham's upbringing under a tyrannical father who taught him to suppress all empathy. We learn about his loveless marriage to an older, wealthy woman and his cold-blooded decision to murder her with a lethal injection of his own invention, a substance he calls toxin Y. So he's convicted and sentenced to life in a penal colony and on a tropical island. In the second half of the novel transforms into something a bit more unexpected. It's a medical thriller. And on the island, yellow fever is ravaging the prison population, and Letham, allowed to work as an epidemiologist, he throws himself into the fight against the disease, ultimately also conducting experiments on himself. So what begins as an anatomy of a murderous mind becomes, almost against the reader's will, a story of possible redemption through science and suffering. So what makes this book special? I think Ernst Weiss, the author, is one of the great forgotten writers of the German language. He was born in Brünn, trained as a physician and a surgeon. He became a close friend of Franz Kafka. He knew all the great names in German literature. Thomas Mann called Georg Letham one of the most interesting books he had come across in years. And yet Weiss is virtually unknown in Germany, but also in particularly in the English-speaking world. So the novel was only translated into English for the first time in 2010, so nearly 80 years after its original publication. So what makes the book unique is this narrative voice. So Letham is so-called unreliable narrator of the first order, a man who claims to analyze himself with scientific rigor, while constantly betraying his own blind spots and his suppressed emotions, his desperate need for human connection that he is constitutionally unable to acknowledge. And so I think the comparison to Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment is obvious and it's warranted, but Weiss brings something that Dostoevsky doesn't. It's the clinical precision of the physician's eye, the medical passages here, the yellow fever research, the description of disease and death, that they have something that only a writer who has himself a medical degree could achieve. So why read this book? I think, yeah, you could read it because it's a genuinely great novel that almost no one knows. One should read it because the question it asks about the relationship between intellect and morality, between scientific ambition and human decency, they are as urgent today as they were in 1931. And because Ernst Weiss's biography gives the novel an additional devastating dimension. He committed suicide in Paris in June 1940, the day the German troops entered the city. So he cut his wrists in his bathtub, I think. And so a man who spent his literary life exploring the tension between reason and destruction, he was destroyed by the ultimate triumph of unreason. So who is it for? I think it's for readers of Dostoevsky, for anyone interested in the literature of the interwar period in Central Europe, for those who appreciate psychologically complex first-person narratives, and for anyone who is curious about what happens when you crossbreed a crime novel with a medical thriller and a philosophical confession. Number 3, Ödön von Horvath, The Eternal Philistine. What is it about? Horvath's first novel is divided into 3 loosely connected parts. Each is centered on a different character. The first part is centered on Herr Kobler. Kobler is a crafty, small-time car dealer in Munich, in Bavaria. He decides to travel to Spain, to the Barcelona World Exhibition, and as a self-styled pan-European, but his pan-Europeanism is little more than a thin veneer over his opportunism, his casual anti-Semitism, and his simple materialistic desire to find a woman with money. And in the second part, there's Agnes Pollinger, a young woman trying to navigate the economic pressures of this Depression-era Munich. She attempts to get practical about life and love, with results that are both comic and quietly devastating. And the third part follows Herr Reithofer, who, in a rare act of genuine selflessness, he does this Agnes Pollinger an unexpected good turn. So the novel is episodic, it's almost fragmentary. It's less a conventional plot than a series of snapshots of petty bourgeois life in interwar Europe. It's held together by Horvath's devastatingly precise ear for the way that people talked and thought and deceived themselves. And what makes this book special, I think Horvath is also one of those writers who ought to be known far better in the English-speaking world than he is. He was born in 1901 in Fiume, which is now called Rijeka in Croatia. He was born to a Hungarian diplomat family, so the family moved and traveled a lot. And he wrote in German, and he is best known for his plays of Tales from the Vienna Woods, etc. But he was killed at the early age of 36 when a branch fell on him, a branch from a tree fell on him during a thunderstorm on the Champs-Élysées in Paris. So immediately after, he made a great contract about the movie rights for his most successful novel. So very tragic, one of the most absurdly tragic deaths in literary history, I think. So what makes The Eternal Philistine so remarkable is its method. So Horvath doesn't satirize his characters from above in a condescending way, but he lets them satirize themselves. His technique is essentially one of sort of ventriloquism. He reproduces the cliches, the empty phrases, the self-serving rationalizations of the petty bourgeois mind with such a surgical accuracy that the comedy and the horror, they emerge simultaneously. So you can laugh at Kobler's absurd pretensions, and then you realize that this man, with his casual racism and his readiness to exploit anyone weaker than himself, he's perfectly representative as a specimen of the mentality that within 3 years would bring Hitler into power. So Horvath wrote this in 1930, I think. He saw it coming. So why should you read it? Yeah, because it's short. It's less, I think that's 100 pages. It's sharp, it's brilliantly funny, and because it's one of those books that makes you deeply uncomfortable, precisely because you recognize the types. They are still everywhere. They are among us even today, and even within ourselves. We sometimes we observe some of these tendencies. So the eternal Philistine is not a specifically German or Austrian phenomenon. He's the man who turns every political conviction into a pose, every human relationship into a transaction, into a deal, every crisis into an opportunity for self-advancement. And so Horvath captured this figure with a precision that has lost nothing of its bite. And for who is it for? I think it's for readers who appreciate social satire with a dark edge. For anyone interested in the literature of the Weimar Republic and this interwar Central Europe, and for those who enjoy short prose, because it's a short piece, a short book. The book is, as mentioned, about 100 pages long. It's also an ideal entry point for anyone curious about Horvath, but uncertain where to start. So only one caveat there, this episodic structure and the absence of the conventional plot that may frustrate readers who need this sort of narrative momentum. But if you can surrender to Horvath's rhythm, this is a small masterpiece. Number 4, Wilkie Collins, I Say No, in this beautiful, in English edition, beautiful antiquarian edition I found in an antiquarian bookstore. I think it was published in this version, published in the early 1900s. So 1884. Wilkie Collins, I Say No. What is this about? The novel opens in the dormitory of Miss Ladd's boarding school for young ladies, where the students are holding a sort of a clandestine midnight feast. And among them is Emily Brown, a spirited and strong-willed orphan, and the new girl Francine de Sor, I think is her name, and a new arrival from the West Indies. And what begins as a charming study of schoolgirl friendship in a boarding school that takes a sharp turn when Emily discovers the truth about her father's death. Her father, James Brown, I think, was found with his throat cut at hand in hand in a couple of years earlier. And the inquest ruled out suicide on the basis of medical evidence and returned a verdict of willful murder, but a verdict against a person's unknown. So, but the case was never solved. And then Emily decides in a way to investigate herself, and she's courted by 2 men, Alban Morris, the school's drawing master, and a reverend, I think he's called Miles Mirabella. He's a charming clergyman, but a strange person as well. And it looks as if one of them, or even 2, both have some connection to her father's death. And what follows is a sort of a detective story driven not by a professional investigator, but by a young woman's stubborn refusal to accept the official silence surrounding the crime, which is considered a cold case. So what makes this special? Let me be upfront. So this is not Wilkie Collins at his best. It's not The Woman in White, it's not The Moonstone. It's a late novel written when Collins was in declining health and struggling off, I think, with some addiction, maybe opium or something like that. And it shows in this novel. The plot relies, at least for my taste, the plot relies too heavily on some improbable coincidences. And some of the secondary characters, they veer strongly into melodrama. And the resolution of the mystery is, to put it charitably, it's problematic. Critics have debated, I think, for over a century whether Collins intended the ambiguity of this ending or simply lost control of his material. Who knows? So, but why am I recommending it? Still, because even a second tier Collins is more interesting than many other novelists' best work, and I enjoyed reading it despite all its weaknesses. And I think I Say No has features that are genuinely remarkable for 1884. So first, there's this female detective sort of person, Emily Brown. She's not a passive heroine waiting to be rescued. She drives the investigation and the plot with an energy and an obstinacy that feels strikingly modern. And second, there is Collins' treatment of this boarding school milieu. The opening chapters, they have a sort of a special atmosphere, a vividness, and a wry humor that shows Collins' observational powers. They were intact even in his later years. And first, there is this novel's deeply unsettling approach to the question of truth and justice. So in the end, we're left genuinely uncertain whether the mystery has been really solved, or whether the characters who claim to know the truth, they are themselves reliable. So why should you read it? Because if you love Collins, it's worth exploring beyond the 4 or 5 famous novels. And I have to admit, the later works are uneven, certainly, but they still contain passages of a real power and ideas that are very Wilkie Collins type, and they are ahead of their time. And because this figure of this Emily Brown is also more compelling than the novel's reputation may suggest. So this is also still in its flawed way, it's a fascinating document of where the detective genre was heading to in the 1880s, the decade before Sherlock Holmes would codify and also in some ways narrow down the form. So who's it for? Yeah, for fans of Wilkie Collins, of course, obviously, for fans of Victorian literature, for readers interested in the history of detective fiction, particularly in its roots in the sensation novel. And I think for anyone who enjoys Victorian mysteries with female protagonists, this book would be a good choice. And for readers who don't mind a novel with some visible flaws, if they're still enough to reward their attention along the way. So if you never read Wilkie Collins so far, please do not start here. Go to The Woman in White or to The Moonstone first. But if you have read those and the other more famous ones and want more Wilkie Collins, then I say no, it is a worthwhile, if imperfect, adventure. Okay, we'll stick to English literature. Anthony Trollope, 2 volumes of the Palliser series, the Eustace, never know how to pronounce this name, Eustace? You pronounce it Eustace Diamonds? And the Duke's Children. So I'm combining these 2 because they belong together as parts of the Trollope's great 6-novel Palliser series. So the rest of them is up there. I think the Eustace Diamonds is, I think, the 3rd installment, and can be read as all of them can be read as standalone novels. And the Duke's Children is the 6th and last. I read them both in January, and they make for a fascinating study in contrasts. So the Eustace Diamonds, what is it about? Lizzie Eustace, a beautiful, clever, and thoroughly unscrupulous young widow. She claims that a fabulously valuable diamond necklace left by her late husband is her personal property. But the Eustace family insists it's a family heirloom that must be returned to the family. And around this legal dispute, are the diamonds paraphernalia or heirlooms? Probably a very British thing. I don't know whether there's an equivalent to these different legal statuses of those objects in German law. Around this legal dispute, Trollope constructs a dazzling social comedy that takes in the worlds of politics and law and high society and the press. And so the diamonds are stolen not once, but twice, or never, who knows? That's a mystery. And the question of who took them and what Lizzie herself knew, that becomes a mystery that drives the plot forward with genuinely surprising turns. So this is Trollope, and so the real interest lies not in the plot mechanics, but in the characters. Lizzie is one of Trollope's great creations. She's a woman who lies so compulsively and so brilliantly that she half convinces even herself. She is vain, she is manipulative, and she's entirely without any moral scruples. And yet Trollope refuses to make her a mere villain. There is something almost admirable about her sheer energy of her self-invention. She is, sometimes I was reminded of, I saw her as a greedy version of Pippi Longstocking. I make the world, the German version of Pippi Longstocking's title song is something like, I make the world the way I like it. So that's the way that Lizzie is thinking. Who cares about how reality really is? I make it how I like it. And alongside her, there's Frank Greystock. It's a well-meaning but weak cousin of her who is tempted by Lizzie's wealth while being engaged to the virtuous but poor Lucy Morris. And so that provides a study in the quiet corrosion of moral compromise. And then the second book, The Duke's Children. What is it about? So jump forward to the final novel of the series. Lady Glencora, the great female character of the entire series, she has died before the novel even begins. And Plantagenet Palliser, now Duke of Omnium, he must raise his 3 adult or almost adult children. He must raise them alone. And they are a burden for him, a disappointment. So his daughter, Lady Mary, has fallen in love with Frank Trigger, a young man of good family, but no fortune. Unacceptable to the Duke. His elder son, Lord Silverbridge, has abandoned the family's tradition of belonging to the liberal political party, and so he went to the Conservatives. And he has fallen in love with Isabel Boncassen, an American girl. Doubly unacceptable. And his younger son, Gerald, has run up gambling debts at Cambridge. And so the novel is essentially about a father learning, painfully and against every instinct, learning to let go. So, and what makes these novels special, and how do they compare? So the Useless Diamonds is Trollope at his most brilliantly acid. It's the novel where his social comedy comes closest to outright satire, and Lizzie Eustace is arguably the most vivid, one of the most vivid characters he ever created. So the prose crackles with a wit that can seem almost modern, but it's also by design a somewhat cold novel. There's no real human warmth at its center, because Lizzie herself, she is incapable of true emotion if it's not centered on herself. So capable of this human warmth directed towards others. And then The Duke's Children, by contrast, it's Trollope at his most humane. The Duke's struggle to accept his children's choices, that is drawn with an emotional depth that is genuinely moving. It was for me as a reader. And Trollope understood the particular tragedy of a man who is, on the one side, he's intelligent enough to know he is wrong, but he is too much formed by habit and principle to admit this and to change easily. So that reading them together, that will give you some interesting insight and interesting food for thought. In the Eustace Diamonds, Trollope examines what happens when someone has no moral center at all. And The Duke's Children, he examined what happens when someone's moral center is strong, but is too rigid to bend and to adapt to the realities of human life. So both are, in their different ways, about the cost of not being able to see other people and their needs clearly. So why should you read them? Because Trollope is one of the great novelists in the English language. Whom am I telling this? This is my English channel. So, and the Palliser series is one of his 2 masterpieces, I think, alongside this Barsetshire series. So, and these 2 novels, they really show his range, from the sharp social comedy of the Eustace Diamonds to this quiet emotional power of the Duke's Children. If you never read Trollope, either of them would be a fine place to start. They're both largely self-contained. They could be read as a standalone novel. And if you have already read a lot of Trollope, you probably don't need me to tell you why he's worth returning to. Who are they for? So they are for readers who love 19th century English fiction, for anyone who enjoyed the BBC adaptation of Trollope. It's for Jane Austen readers looking for something with a wider social canvas, or for anyone who appreciates novels where character and moral complexity matter more than just the plot mechanics. There's one caveat for each. So the Eustace Diamonds can feel slow in its middle section when all the legal intricacies threaten to overwhelm the story, and the Duke's Children require some emotional patience. The Duke's obstinacy can be exasperating before it becomes touching, sometimes even a bit pathetic. But both are rewarding in ways that only really long, carefully built novels can be. So these were my books, the books I read in January. Letham, Weiss, Horváth, Collins, and Trollope. Very different worlds, very different languages and traditions, and that's precisely the beauty of reading of literature. And in a single month, you can teleport yourself from a cybernetic fairy tale universe to a tropical penal colony, from the beer halls of Munich in Bavaria to Victorian girls' boarding schools, and to the drawing rooms of the English aristocracy. So thanks for watching. As always, I look forward to your comments. Do let me know which of these books interest you, whether you have already read any of them, whether you enjoy this format of this monthly wrap-up, and of course, your own reading recommendations are also always welcome. Having said this, hope to see you next time. Have a great reading time. Until then, take care. Bye-bye and ciao.